Victoria Sharma thought she had found the perfect escape with Arjun Mehta, but Richard Collins, the wealthy Canadian millionaire she betrayed, was already setting a deadly trap that would turn their forbidden affair into a chilling true crime story of greed, passion, and fatal revenge. Arjun Malhotra arrived in Toronto with nothing but a suitcase, a student visa, and the weight of his family's expectations on his shoulders. Coming from a small town in India, he had grown up surrounded by stories of people who had gone abroad and built extraordinary lives. His parents had invested everything they had to send him overseas, believing that an education in Canada would secure him a future filled with opportunities. The reality, however, was far less glamorous. The cost of living was high, part-time jobs paid barely enough to cover rent, and the loneliness of being thousands of miles away from home gnawed at him. Arjun worked long hours at a downtown cafe while juggling classes, never daring to complain because failure was not an option. He was under constant pressure to succeed, yet the odds seemed stacked against him. One evening, his life took a sharp turn. He had volunteered at a charity gala hosted by one of Toronto's most prestigious business families. The event was extravagant, filled with men in tailored suits and women in glittering gowns. Arjun felt like an outsider in that world, standing in the corner serving drinks while watching the elite mingle. That was when his eyes met Victoria Hayes. She was radiant, dressed in a silk gown that shimmered under the chandelier lights. Her presence demanded attention, yet she carried herself with an effortless elegance. At 45, she was a woman who exuded both confidence and mystery. What struck Arjun most was the way she looked at him, as though she had noticed him among a sea of faces. Victoria was a well-known millionaire in Toronto's social circles. She owned several businesses, had her name on charity boards, and was married to Richard Hayes, a powerful figure in the real estate world. Their marriage, however, was nothing more than a public arrangement. Richard was cold, distant, and preoccupied with his empire, leaving Victoria to seek fulfillment elsewhere. To the world, she played the role of the perfect wife, but inside, she longed for something real. When she saw Arjun that evening, young, ambitious, and strikingly different from the men in her circle, she felt an excitement she had not experienced in years. For Arjun, the encounter was surreal. He had only read about people like her in magazines or seen them in movies, yet here she was, speaking to him, smiling as though he mattered in that glittering crowd. At first, he thought it was harmless curiosity, maybe even politeness. But when she lingered near him, asking questions about his life, he sensed something deeper. He could feel the pull between them, something both thrilling and dangerous. For a young man struggling to find stability, her attention felt like validation, a sign that maybe his life could change in ways he had never imagined. As the evening drew to a close, Victoria slipped him her card, a gesture that seemed innocent but carried a world of implication. Arjun walked home that night in disbelief, holding on to the card like it was a golden ticket. He didn't know what it would lead to, but he felt, for the first time since leaving India, that destiny had handed him an opportunity. He couldn't have known that this moment, so full of possibility, would eventually pull him into a web of love, lies, and betrayal that would change his life forever. The days following, the gala replayed in Arjun's mind like a dream he could not shake. Every time he pulled the small card from his wallet and read Victoria's name, his heart raced. He hesitated for nearly a week before finally sending her a short message. To his surprise, she responded immediately, inviting him to meet her for coffee at a quiet cafe far from the downtown chaos. When Arjun arrived, nervous and unsure of what to expect, Victoria was already there, waiting with a warm smile and an air of calm that put him at ease. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from light topics about school and work to more personal confessions about loneliness and unfulfilled dreams. Arjun was captivated not just by her wealth and beauty, but by the way she listened to him with genuine interest. That single meeting led to many more. Soon, their secret encounters became the highlight of Arjun's week. He found himself living two lives by day, the struggling student pouring coffee for strangers, and by night, the confidant and lover of a woman who belonged to a different world. Victoria showered him with gifts he never imagined owning: designer clothes, an expensive watch, even an envelope of cash when she noticed him skipping meals to save money. At first, Arjun resisted the money, fearing it would make him feel indebted. But Victoria insisted, telling him she admired his ambition and wanted to see him succeed. Her generosity blurred the lines between affection and control, though he was too enchanted to notice. Behind her glamorous smile, however, Victoria was carefully weaving her own web. She had grown tired of her cold and calculated husband, Richard, who spent his nights at the office and treated her like a trophy rather than a partner. Arjun represented something pure and exciting, an escape from her gilded cage. But Victoria was also aware of the vulnerability she had spotted in him, his desperation for stability, and the ever-looming expiration date of his student visa. She knew exactly how to feed his ambition while binding him closer to her. Their relationship grew more intense, with stolen weekends in hotels and whispered promises of a brighter future. Arjun began to feel that fate had finally shifted in his favor. For the first time since leaving India, he no longer felt like an outsider. Victoria told him stories of her travels, introduced him discreetly to exclusive circles, and filled his imagination with visions of the life he had always dreamed of. Yet, in the quiet moments when she fell silent, her eyes revealed something else, an unspoken calculation, as if she were always 2 steps ahead of him. Arjun didn't question it, blinded by his growing attachment and the intoxicating mix of love and luxury. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Whispers among Victoria's acquaintances began to circulate about her late-night absences, and Richard, though indifferent for years, started to sense her distraction. What began as a secret affair was now a dangerous game. One that threatened to unravel not just Victoria's carefully crafted image, but Arjun's entire future in Canada. Neither of them realized that the passion binding them together was also steering them toward a betrayal that would soon turn deadly. As the weeks passed, Arjun's relationship with Victoria began to feel less like a whirlwind romance and more like a carefully constructed plan. At first, he had believed her affection was genuine, a rare stroke of luck in his otherwise difficult life. But gradually, the gestures that once felt generous started to carry an undertone of expectation. Victoria began to test his loyalty in subtle ways, asking him to skip work shifts to be with her, to keep his phone switched off when they met, and to avoid speaking about their relationship to anyone, even his closest friends. He complied without question, afraid of losing her, but deep down he knew he was becoming entangled in something far larger than himself. Victoria soon introduced a new topic into their conversations: his visa. She asked about its expiration date, about the difficulties of extending it, and about how he planned to remain in Canada after graduation. Arjun, initially reluctant to share too much, eventually confessed the truth. Without sponsorship or marriage, he would have to return to India, a prospect that terrified him. He spoke of the sacrifices his family had made, the debts they had taken on, and the humiliation he would face if he returned empty. Victoria listened with a mix of sympathy and calculation, then gently suggested that perhaps she could help. She hinted at her connections in legal circles, at the ease with which she could arrange things, if only he trusted her completely. The idea of marriage entered their discussions not as a declaration of love, but as a solution to a problem. Victoria floated the notion that if she and Arjun were to marry in secret, he could secure permanent residency. Arjun was hesitant, torn between gratitude and fear. The thought of being tied to a married woman carried enormous risk. But Victoria soothed his doubts, promising she would eventually leave Richard and that their union could be legitimized without scandal. She spoke with such conviction that Arjun found himself believing her, even as a quiet voice in his mind warned him he was venturing into dangerous territory. Behind the veil of intimacy, Victoria's manipulation deepened. She began to use her wealth as leverage, reminding him of the gifts, the opportunities, and the doors she had opened for him. Each time Arjun resisted her plans, she would withdraw slightly, making him feel the sting of distance until he caved in. He rationalized her behavior as passion, convincing himself that her demands were born from love rather than control. The reality was far colder. Victoria was orchestrating a scheme that served her interests above all else. Meanwhile, Richard, though still detached, had grown increasingly suspicious. His wife's unexplained absences and sudden mood swings were too glaring to ignore. He began quietly investigating her movements, hiring a private investigator who shadowed her discreetly. The evidence was slow to gather. But what was discovered painted a damning picture. Arjun, unaware of the shadow closing in, continued to drift deeper into Victoria's world, blind to the fact that his every step was being watched. What began as a romance of chance encounters and whispered promises was transforming into a high-stakes deception. Arjun's future now hung on Victoria's promises, and though he believed he was climbing toward the life he had always wanted, he was in fact walking into a carefully laid trap, one that would soon spiral into betrayal and violence. Richard's suspicions eventually reached a breaking point. The private investigator he had hired delivered a set of photographs that confirmed his worst fears. There was no room left for doubt his wife was having an affair with a much younger man. And their meetings were neither fleeting nor innocent. The images showed them in restaurants, in hotels, and sometimes just walking together with a familiarity that spoke of something much deeper. Richard felt betrayed. But his anger was not only directed at Victoria. The presence of Arjun in those photographs, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed he had won, ignited a rage in him that bordered on obsession. Victoria, unaware of how much Richard already knew, continued to manipulate Arjun with promises of marriage and a secure future. She began drawing up plans, urging him to trust her, to sign papers she claimed would help with immigration. Arjun hesitated when legal documents were placed before him, but her reassurances and his own desperation silenced his doubts. Each step he took was another knot tightening around his neck, though he didn't yet realize it. To him, Victoria was the only hope of avoiding deportation and the crushing disappointment of returning to India with nothing to show for his sacrifices. Richard, however, was not the kind of man to confront things directly without ensuring he controlled the outcome. His wealth gave him access to people and resources that Arjun could never have imagined. Instead of filing for divorce or confronting his wife outright, Richard began to set his own trap. He funneled money discreetly into accounts that he could use without detection, created layers of legal protection for his fortune, and positioned himself so that if Victoria made any move against him, she would be exposed. The irony was that while Victoria thought she was orchestrating a scheme against Richard, he was quietly turning the tables, planning to destroy her and anyone who stood with her. The tension between the three lives grew silently. Victoria became more demanding, insisting that Arjun stop worrying and trust her entirely, even going as far as to suggest he cut ties with his family back in India, so no one could interfere. Arjun agreed reluctantly, though his unease grew with every request. He could not shake the feeling that he was being pushed further into something irreversible. Meanwhile, Richard staged his calm demeanor at home, pretending indifference, while quietly preparing for the confrontation that he knew would come. The collision finally began one evening when Richard returned home earlier than expected. Victoria and Arjun were in the house, reviewing documents she had told Arjun were related to his residency. Richard entered the room without warning, his calm and composed presence more chilling than an outburst. Arjun froze, his heart pounding, while Victoria's confident smile faltered for the first time. Richard said little, but his silence carried a weight that filled the air with dread. In that moment, both Victoria and Arjun realized that their carefully built illusion was collapsing. Richard had seen through them all along, and the storm that was about to follow would be far more dangerous than either of them had prepared for. The night that began with silent tension quickly spiraled into an irreversible tragedy. Richard's calm composure, as he stood before Victoria and Arjun, masked the fury that had been festering inside him for months. His eyes lingered on the documents scattered across the table. The supposed immigration papers Victoria had crafted for Arjun. Without raising his voice, Richard collected the pages, glanced over them, and then tossed them aside as if they were nothing more than trash. The gesture cut deeper than any words could, exposing how meaningless their plotting had been against someone like him. Victoria attempted to regain control, insisting that Arjun trust her, but Richard's stillness was a power neither of them could match. It was the silence of a man who had already decided how the night would end. Richard invited Arjun to sit, his voice unnervingly steady. He laid out everything he knew. The affair, the deceit, the money Victoria had siphoned, and the legal traps she thought were invisible but were already dismantled by his lawyers. Every word was a revelation to Arjun, who realized in shock that the promises Victoria had whispered were hollow, that she had used his desperation as a weapon. In that moment, the scales fell from his eyes, and the fear that replaced his infatuation was overwhelming. Richard wasn't just a betrayed husband, he was a man of immense influence, capable of crushing them without lifting a hand. Victoria's mask cracked under the pressure. She shifted the blame onto Arjun, painting him as the manipulator, the one who had seduced her. Arjun, equally desperate, accused her of using him as a pawn. Their alliance, once so carefully stitched together by desire and greed, unraveled in front of Richard, who watched with the detachment of a predator observing prey turn on each other. What neither of them realized was that Richard had engineered this confrontation precisely to expose their weaknesses. He knew that once they turned on each other, it would be easy to push the final piece into place. The night grew darker, both outside and inside the mansion. Richard produced a folder, laying it neatly on the table. Inside were copies of transactions, messages, and photographs, evidence that would destroy Victoria's reputation and ensure our deportation! If he chose to hand them over to the authorities. He gave no ultimatum. Only let the weight of the documents linger in the silence. For Victoria, it was the end of the life she had built, the luxury she clung to. For Arjun, it was the shattering of his dream, the realization that his gamble had not only failed but doomed him entirely. What happened next blurred between rage and despair. In her panic, Victoria lunged at Richard, screaming words that broke through her practiced eloquence. Arjun, caught in the chaos, tried to stop her, but in the struggle, something violent and irreversible occurred. A glass shattered, blood spilled, and the illusion of control dissolved. By the time the house quieted again, Richard lay lifeless, and both Victoria and Arjun stared at what they had done, horror etched into their faces. The murder was not premeditated by them, but desperation and fear had turned the confrontation into a fatal act. Yet, Richard's reach extended even beyond death. Within hours, his security systems, already programmed to monitor the house, captured everything. The evidence that would have ruined Victoria and Arjun was now compounded by recordings of the crime itself. By morning, they were no longer lovers. Caught in a scandal, they were fugitives, marked by betrayal and blood. The true revenge of Richard was not only in the confrontation, but in the legacy he left behind. Victoria and Arjun's downfall was inevitable, sealed the moment they chose deceit over honesty. The final chapter of their story was not written by them, but by the man they believed they could outsmart, whose silent strength orchestrated their destruction even from the grave.